let's talk about manipulators. So basically what we have here is if I left click on here, Action Center, what you'll get is you'll get a number of presets, a number of combinations that are preset for you by Luxology. And these are very useful, and for the most part, this is all you really need to know in terms of modeling. But if you're modeling anything more technical, and if you want to speed up your process and perhaps build your own tools, what you can do is you can use these tools right here. But before we go into all this, let's look at the anatomy of a manipulator or an action center. Basically, if I just, first of all, I'm going to go into automatic, and I'm just going to click anywhere out in this viewport. What you have is you have the basic manipulator. You have the axes, so you have the X, Y, and Z, and you have the planes, which you can lock to. So this green one, for example, locks the X, or locks the movement to the X and Z axis. This one moves to the X and Y, and this one here, as you can see, it's situated on the Y and Z plane. Now, at the center here, you have the actual action center. And what you can do with this is that, I can basically go ahead and just move this where I want it to exist. So I can move my manipulator to exactly where I want. Now, where does this come in handy? Well, if I was going to do something like this, where I selected just this part of the handle, and I go into a rotate tool, I can easily rotate from exactly where I want. Now, I might have to reset my action center here to automatic, but now I can move it to where I need it, and I can rotate it from where I want to rotate it. So this is very useful for that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's also useful for if I'm just going to go into this cube, and if I go ahead and just select this tube here. Let's just say I'm working on, and let me select all these objects. If I'm working on this part of the model. Now, if I double click on this, and I want to move this object somewhere in here, then if I press the move tool right now, you'll notice that, well, I don't see anything. That's because the manipulator is hidden over here. So generally in other applications, what you would get is, you'd have to go into a pivot mode, you'd have to move the manipulator over to here, turn it back into a manipulation mode, and then you'd have to move it. In Modo, what I can do is I can easily, especially if I'm in automatic mode again, I can just click anywhere I want, and I can still do my movement. So I can be as accurate as I want, like that. Or I can just go up here, left click, and I can move my object exactly where I need it to be. So for that kind of stuff, having the ability to place your action axis anywhere you want is actually very, very useful. But it gives you a lot more than that. And let's just go through these presets first, and then I'm going to go into the actual, the separate abilities to create your own manipulators. And again, basically what you have is you have your center where your axis is centered on, and you have the axis, and all this is how is your axis being aligned to the world or object or whatever that you're aligning it to. So you can snap, for example, the center to the center of this polygon. You can snap it to the center of this edge, or to a vertex, or to another object, or you can snap it anywhere you want on the screen. So that's what you do with centers. And then the axis is either aligned to the world. As you can see here, the Y right now is pointing up. The X is pointing this way and the Z pointing this way. So I could have it aligned to the world, to the overall grid, or I can maybe have the axis aligned to one selection or one polygon, or an average of my selection. I can also make it face the screen, so the Y and X is always locked to my screen axis, or maybe I can have it locked to a very specific element or parent, origin, etc., etc. Anyways, I'm gonna show exactly how these work. But again, all these presets, everything that's between automatic and pivot, center, parent axis, all these are just presets of all this stuff combined. So instead of you having to go through center, auto, axis, auto every single time, you just have an automatic mode. It's all the same. So anyways, let's explore these presets. So first of all, we have the automatic mode. Now, the nice thing about the automatic mode is that once again, you are able to place your manipulator anywhere you want in the 3D scene. Now, of course, this is great because it doesn't, like if I was to move an object, it doesn't obstruct my overall, viewing ability of my object. So the manipulator is not covering any part of my object. Now, of course, if I'm just, doing something like this and I just want to move my object roughly to where I want it, once again, I can see my object or whatever I have my, I'm aligning my object to. And again, my manipulator does not cover my object. It's also useful for things like if I want to align it over here, and once again, go into rotate, I can place it wherever I want, and I can rotate it from that point, like so. So it's just really useful for that kind of stuff. Same thing with scaling, I can scale it towards any corner that I want. So for that kind of stuff, automatic is awesome. Selection works a little bit differently. So if I'm just going to make a selection, like that, I'm just middle clicking all the way across. Then I go into selection and I press W for move. What you'll get is you'll get something weird. Because what selection is actually doing is it's placing the action center. So the center of my manipulator is at the center of the selection. But you also might notice that my axes are actually misaligned from the world. If you look at this portion of the viewport, you'll actually get the world axes. So you'll have the current world axes. Right now, the Z is pointing this way, the X and Y are pointing that way. Now, if I look at my grid, you'll see the positive X, the negative Z here. So the positive X is actually the red. So it's pointing in that direction. Positive Z is pointing in this direction because the negative Z is in here. Negative X is over here. And of course, Y is always up and it's not actually being displayed. But if we look at the manipulators right now, well, what's going on? Well, the Y is actually pointing down here. And even though the Z is traveling across this way, right now it's traveling along the X. And it's not really even aligned to that because if you notice, it's actually misaligned altogether. This is no good. Now, the reason why this is happening is because what Modo is doing is it's trying to average your selection and give you some sort of manipulation angle. Now, if I was going to select one polygon and press W, while of course I'm using the selection action center, what's going on is that the Z is actually pointing in the polygon normal. Now, the polygon normal is basically the facing direction of that polygon, more or less. It works a little bit different when you got a polygon that's kind of misaligned and one of these vertices is off, so the plane becomes kind of it's not a flat plane anymore. So, but anyways, more or less on a flat plane, the normal points away like that, and you can easily just use the manipulator will always point on the z-axis, or it should. Now, where it starts to change is if I now select these three polygons like that, and I press move again, you'll now notice that the Z, the Y, and the X are actually misaligned. Now, what's going on is it's trying to average out the angle, and it's trying to give you, basically the average. Now, where this actually breaks is when you have something like this. It doesn't necessarily break, but it tries to average all these polygons out, and it's guessing that the average normal that it's trying to point at is in this direction. Now you have a few more options. Selection border is actually really useful for some tools. Now if I go to something like this, press move, and I go to selection border, you'll notice that it's still snapping it to the center of the selection, more or less, but it's snapping it to the center of the selection's border. So the hole in the selection is where the manipulator is going to center itself on. And of course, once again, it tries to, find an average normal, or actually maybe not, because this one seems a little bit better aligned. But it should more or less work the same. Selection center auto axis is basically what the selection tries to be, except what's going to happen is selection center auto axis aligns that's basically the center stays in the center of the selection, just like the selection action center did. The main difference is that the manipulator is now aligned to the world. So if I go over here and I look, positive y is, well, positive y, it's perfectly vertical. X is running in that direction, so is this. So the world is, if you notice again, positive X is running this way, so is this. Positive Z is running this way, well, so is this axis. And positive Y is obviously vertical up and down. So this is basically just another variation of the selection. Now, the element action center is a little bit different. Now, the cool thing about the element action center is that I can make a selection, whatever it may be, and then right now you see it being aligned like this. But the cool thing is about this one is that I can freely select anything I want. I can select the polygon, edge, or vertex anywhere, and it's going to align the manipulator to that element's axis or normal. So I can move it along the world axis if I want, because this polygon is pretty much aligned to that. Or I can of course align it to this polygon here, and now it's aligned to this axis. And then of course I could do something like this. Very nice. So I can easily change up the axis which I want to manipulate on. Now, where this would come in handy is, for example, like let's just say you're building a house. So let me just make a quick box. I'm just going to add item mesh, and I'm going to choose this new object. So let me just make a quick example. Is if I was gonna go ahead and build a house, and this house has something like this, where one of these walls is on an angle. Well, if I want to start working over here, like let's just say I make a balcony like that, and and let's just say I want to do something with this, like perhaps move this object along this axis here. Well, then element move actually comes in handy very much. If I have more objects, like an array of objects, and I want to move them towards, on this angle here. So let's just say, let me just choose that polygon as a thing. I'm just going to go ahead and just build some cubes. And what you're actually not seeing right now is that I've actually manipulated the work plane. So if I go down and look at my work plane is actually snapped to this polygon. So what I did is I just hovered over here and just pressed home. So if I press end, it snaps back to default. If I hover over, I press home, it snaps to this polygon. So I'm easily able to create a cubic object based on the axis of this polygon here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and just clone this several times. And let's just say I have several objects like this. And I want to move them along this line over here, right? But what if this object, or what if all these objects are a little bit off? What if there's something else that's off about this? And, what if, of course I use and then I use the selection or element axis. Well, right now, what if I want to move these railings, or what, let's just say they're railings. What if I want to move them along this polygon here? Well, all I have to do is I just have to click on this polygon and I'm set to go, right? But right now I'm moving all of them. So let me just select all these railings here. And if I select this line, it lets me move all these objects on this odd angle. At the same time, I could select this edge and I could move them back and forth. And I am moving these objects along like that. So what this gives me is it gives me the ability to move any object that I want on any kind of axis that I wish, which is very useful for architectural kind of things. Now, screen works a little bit different. Screen is mostly useful for much more organic like objects. Now, where I would use it is if I look at this silhouette right here, you know, you might notice some rounding. And now let's pretend this is a character and I want to move these things in screen space. Generally, the workflow would be that I would go into element move tool. I might just increase the radius. I might make the transform invisible, so I can just manipulate things like this. And then, of course, I would be in screen space mode because I would just want to make sure that I align the overall silhouette to a screen space kind of deal, right? So I just want to move these things in screen space. Move them exactly how I like. And this way I could get very predictable movement from Modo. Now if I look at the actual manipulators, what you'll notice first of all is that Y or X and Y are pointing up and down, left and right. Regardless of where I click, they are always pointing in the same direction. Now it might be a little bit confusing because you see that the Z is changing. Once it's pointing up, once it's pointing down. What's actually happening is that considering this is a perspective viewport, the Z is actually always pointing towards the center of the viewport, so the vanishing point. You'll notice that it's constantly, in a radial fashion, it's always changing direction. And if you look at it now, it's going left, right, and so on. Notice how it's changing when I move it. So basically that's that for that one. Origin, very simple. The manipulator automatically snaps to the origin of the entire world. This is very useful for things like if you have a symmetrical character and you just want to slice one side off and mirror it over. For things like that, it's very useful for. Another thing it's useful for is if I went ahead and scaled this entire object. I think I might have, yep, fall off to 0. Okay, so if I want to scale things uniformly like this, I might use origin. You know, it's useful for that kind of stuff. Now, basically the next one we have is parent, and parent I'm not going to go into mostly because it's only used for animation. Pivot is also only used for animation, and so is this one. Actually, this one is really used for if you're going to be doing things like rigging and you want to move things and contain, basically retain a hierarchy of things. I guess I could cover that one here, but basically all it is that if I have a parent and a child, when I select the child, you'll notice that, well, technically all my objects right now have their center in the middle, but basically what's happening is it's getting its transform center, it's locking the handles, the transform handles, to the parent axis. So if I was going to go into items, and I was going to select the child here, then you'll notice that its center is over here, but considering I'm in parent mode, it's actually going to its parent, and it's moving the transform over there. Now let me just move the parent over here. So that is, anyways, what you'll now notice is that when I selected the child, which is this object here, and I activate the move tool, it's actually moving, it's actually locking the transform handles, so the axes that I'm working with. The action center is actually locked to the parent's axis, or center. So I'm just going to undo that for now.
Now, in terms of pivot and pivot center parent axis, I'm not going to cover those just because, again, they're not useful for modeling. So, and to be honest, I've never used them, so I don't even really know the particulars of those ones. So the final one that I'm going to go into is local. Now, local is really good for, again, things like let me just select an edge loop. I'm going to press Alt-L to select all the rings, and then I'm going to go into scale mode. And now, as you can see, I can make this spring thicker or thinner. Very cool. Same thing here. You know, for any object that's built properly, it will work like this. Now, if I go to an object like this, and let's just say I select these 5 edges here, and what you'll notice is that I've essentially selected one quadrant of this round object. So I have 45-degree angle between these objects. Now, if I just go to a regular move tool, you'll notice that every single one of these is moving along its normal. So I'm actually expanding the radius, so to speak, of that object. So that's kind of cool, and really useful for that kind of stuff. And again, if I wanted to do something like that, I could easily move a single group of objects along their normal. I could move things like this. I could get effects like that. So it's got a lot of really neat effects, and you really got to play around with this. So in terms of the Action Center presets, I am done. In the next chapter, I'm going to cover how to get more particular usage out of all these. Now, because of the fact that I've covered all these, some of these will actually be very self-explanatory. I mean, you also have auto selection, selection border, element, screen, and all the others. So it kind of makes sense based on what you already know about this. Same thing with axis. But considering there is more use in these, I'm going to go over a few different scenarios. And element mode is just basically a different way to snap the manipulator. But anyways, I'm going to go into that in the next chapter.